Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. You really put some extra oomph into that one, Bills. I like it.
Andrew. You know why? Because we're recording this on a Friday.
A bit of extra energy, right?
And everybody seems to have a bit of spring in their step on a Friday. Plus, but wait, there's more. I actually reckon this topic is awesome.
Well, this topic is probably, I dare say, the main driver of why people come to see a financial advisor. I'd be pretty confident to say that.
I was waiting for a joke because we're actually talking about how much money that you need in retirement, right? In terms of retirement income. So I thought
don't be like Billy, right? You don't want to be 70, still working, still grinding away.
Well, I thought you were going to make a joke about me being old and being about to access my superannuation. That's the reason why I'm really excited about this topic, right? So let's just move on. Andrew, take us into it. Where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the first point to start is really just talking about, retirement. So a lot of people think retirement as this, I don't know, one point in time, you have an epiphany and you say, hey, tomorrow I'm not working, and you stamped up on the desk, dance on the desk and exit the office the next day.
Give everybody the bird. Yeah. The mic drop. I'm out of here.
Exactly right. But I guess in our experience, retirement hasn't worked like that for the vast majority of our clients. The vast majority of our clients, retirement is a transition rather than something that, springs overnight. So what we see most people start to do is at a point in time, so I'm not going to put an age behind it, At a point in time, most people start to slow down work. They go from working 5 days a week to working 3 days a week, potentially looking after grandchildren, things like that, and then slowly easing their way into retirement. And so I think that's a really important distinction, because you try to put a timeline on when you're going to retire, but most people don't put a timeline or factor into the fact that in the later years of their working life, they're not going to be working as much, or maybe they don't want to be working as much. I don't want to say not, because some people will be. And so there's going to be a slowdown period in terms of your ability to generate income, generate assets in the latter years of your life is probably going to be lower if you slow down and ease into retirement rather than working all the way up until the final end of it.
Fair point. And I guess the other thing too, just to elaborate on that slightly, is we tend to find that as people do age, their risk profile becomes more conservative. Yep. So you actually back off the amount of growth assets that you're exposed to.
And probably should become more.
And it's not the wrong decision the majority of the time. But once again, you'd expect that would lead to a less investment return. So that tends to happen quite naturally anyway. And then above and beyond that, if you're changing your working arrangements where you are working less, that's obviously the case as well too. But from our perspective, I guess the thing that we think about and the cornerstone of this discussion is retirement income. So how much money do I need in retirement? Where does it come from? And what does it look like? Because one of the really interesting things is that the shape of retirement income is different depending on what life stage you're at. So as an example, and we're making some assumptions here, but if you're at the start of your retirement years, obviously you've got all of the time that you didn't have when you were working, and whether that's you've stopped working completely or you've transitioned into part-time work, but you've got more time on your hands, you've got access to money, assuming that you've got access to your superannuation. So you're probably doing all of those things that you haven't done that are now possible because you've got the time and money to do them. Whereas you may have done those in the earlier years of your retirement, but then in the later years of your retirement, you've either ticked those off the list or you don't have the energy to do those anymore. So you don't need as much money in the later years of retirement than you do at the start of your retirement. So we tend to find that with the income requirements, it's actually not the same necessarily each and every year. Over time, it does change and it can decrease.
Yeah. So what we usually see is a bit of an uptick in terms of the retirement income that most people need in the earlier years, because you're doing the things that you didn't have time to do, like travel, like all of those things. And then in the latter years of your retirement, your required income in retirement starts to decrease over a period of time because you're less mobile and maybe not going out as much or not doing as many overseas trips because you've either done it or you don't have the energy or ability to do so.
Yep. And the reason why I think that's relevant as well too is because it then has that income shape then has an impact on the type of assets that you have that are generating income for you. So as an example, if you've got $1 million in liquid assets, international shares, Australian shares, maybe a property fund, some infrastructure, whatever it may be, $1 million in that value versus $1 million in a property where the rental income is potentially fixed, it provides two different types of income flexibility for the person that we're talking about, the investor or the retiree.
Yeah. So I probably need a whiteboard to quote Billy, but if you consider a property, right, you're receiving the same amount of income and that's all the asset that this person has versus, let's say, what Billy's describing, which is potentially a superannuation fund, for instance, right? Same value, but in a property, your income is 100% fixed and it will stay like that and it's linear. Whereas in a superannuation fund, you can draw some of the assets out. And so while you have that uptick in income requirements in the early years, you can start to sell a portion of your assets in order to fund that uptick. Whereas when you've got a linear source of income, but not a linear expense, the uptick in expenses might be higher than what your income is in a particular year. You don't have the ability to, sell a letterbox or a driveway or something in a property in order to, cover that period of time. The other important distinction within that is frequently we get asked, how much money do I need in retirement? The actual answer and everything that we're talking about is how much income do I need in retirement? Not what do I need in terms of assets. There's, numbers being thrown around like you need $1 million in super or this or that. It depends on what your goals are. It depends on what your circumstances are. It depends on the number of assets that you have. So talking about having dollar amount is just, it's much too simplistic of an answer that you need X amount of assets in order to be able to retire, because number one, each of those assets will perform differently. Number two, everyone's retirement lifestyle is going to be completely different. So you really need to dig a little bit deeper than just a number that you need to achieve.
Yeah. But so we don't leave people hanging, I think we might elaborate on that a little bit, because there's some rules of thumb and we might just chuck a few numbers out that we use in our industry to help guide people with this, because it's not like you wake up one day and you go, oh, yeah, I know that I need X amount of dollars when I retire and I'm going to stop working at this age and I'm going to do this. And yeah, nobody does that. But some of the simpler methods that we use, and this is published on the Australian government's Money Smart website. They talk about 2/3 of your pre-retirement income is what you will need in retirement in order to maintain your lifestyle. So that's published data that you can get access to in relation to that. But there's also some further data that comes out from the Australian superannuation, the Association of Superannuation Funds. It's always a bit of a tongue twister. They publish some data regularly around the difference between a comfortable lifestyle and a moderate lifestyle. And they actually talk about the different categories between what constitutes comfortable and what constitutes modest. But the numbers that they're talking about, and they also talk about being supplemented with the age pension and stuff. But for a comfortable lifestyle in retirement, they're talking about a retirement income of $965 per week. Then from a modest perspective, it's $612 per week. Now, from my perspective, and Andrew, I'd love to get your thoughts on it and things like that as well too, that actually doesn't sound like a lot of money from what I'm hearing and just knowing what stuff costs and things like that. So,
yeah, I mean, look, $965 a week is, number one, it's in my experience let's say that it's comfortable. I'd probably say that that's modest in terms of what we see with most people. But I think a really important distinction within this is let's use the assumption that this is correct, right? $965 per week is say that's a comfortable retirement. Well, your age pension currently is pretty much double that. Sorry, is pretty much half of that. So in order for you to be able to retire on a comfortable or modest or whatever, number or whatever sort of association you want to put with that number, you have to have more money than just purely the age pension. Because even if we look at this number, it's quite a scary statistic to look at the fact that that's essentially half of what the age pension is in this country. And so that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it, which I guess a lot of people tend to forget about, is you look at the number, and a lot of people, your retirement income number is actually lower than what you'd expect. And you don't want to push this too far, because you'd much rather have too much money rather than not enough money. But you think about when you're accumulating wealth, you're probably needing to do a combination of a few things. One, there's income tax that you're paying on your income. Yep. So most people are comparing it to their gross income. For a lot of people, and especially this generation that have been working for a number of years, they're drawing an income from superannuation, which is tax exempt. So you're not paying any income tax. Number two, when you're accumulating your wealth and when you're growing your wealth, you're putting money towards investments because you're accumulating your wealth. Once you're in the retirement phase, well, you're no longer needing to put any money into investments. You're actually drawing money out of investments. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of the excess funds that goes towards investments and the excess funds that goes towards income tax is why you look at, the simple method of 2/3 of your pre-retirement income. That 1/3 is coming primarily from those two aspects. But the sort of taking it all back to your question, yes, I do think that number is probably quite modest in nature, and for most people, or at least in our experience, they do need a little bit more than that. But make sure that you're accumulating wealth, because if you're not, age pension's not going to cover it.
Yeah. So that was a really long-winded answer. So I'm just going to try and summarize this really quickly and really succinctly. That the more money that you have in retirement, the greater the amount of flexibility that you've got to be able to have the lifestyle that you want. So, that's probably just the crux of it, because even though there is government support through the age pension, you want to be able to enjoy your retirement if you're in that position. So if you can contribute to build your asset base throughout your working career to help support you in the time that you're not working, obviously the more money, the better from that perspective. But yeah, there's some really good guides. Like I said, the Association of Super Funds Australia, you can have a look at that, and that gives a bit of a breakdown in terms of what they constitute and how they calculate those numbers. Andrew, I think we spoke about it a little bit earlier in terms of the retirement. The amount of money that we need in retirement is less than while we're working. And I guess that also ties into you probably need a little bit more money at the start of your retirement. So that's simply because what we were describing before, when you first retire, there's all of these things that you want to see and do. And a lot of the big ones really are travel. So there's a big travel expense. So we find that the annual income is actually exceeding the last year's income that people earn. You do that for a couple of years and then it actually dips below it.
Yeah, exactly right. I guess the other, the thing to really note with all of this is there's some really great guides. We can talk about, ASFA and their guide around a comfortable income. We can talk about, 2/3 of pre-retirement income and all of that stuff. What we do as advisors when we're actually doing this for clients' bills?
Well, look, realistically, you're trying to maximize their position. You're trying to maximize their position and optimize it in the confines of their circumstances, taking into consideration a whole range of other things. So if we're just looking at retirement planning, it's Are there things that we can do inside the superannuation environment to try and optimize that position, potentially moving things around a little bit, a different investment style, recontribution strategies to change the tax status. That's a bit more around estate planning. But if we're talking about somebody who has a longer period of time before they access superannuation, it's really looking at the client circumstances and saying, okay, what is it that we can do? And then using that, projecting that out, reverse engineering and saying, okay, if we've got a target to hit, and I'll use a worked example, but if we've got a target to hit, how much time frame have we got? What do we need to do? So as an example, if you set a goal and say, I want to have a certain amount of money in my superannuation by the time I hit age 65, and you do a gap analysis and say, okay, I'm $500,000 short of that. What do I need to do between now and then? So is it extra contributions? Is it changing the investment approach? Is it taking on more risk? Is it potentially taking other assets that you may have outside of super and put those in? And one of the reasons, just on that point, that we talk about superannuation as such an effective retirement income vehicle is simply because of the tax-free status of the income when you're in pension phase. And you can't, there's no other investment vehicle in Australia where that is on offer. So that's the reason why we talk about superannuation, but that's some of the things that we tend to think about. And obviously from our perspective, when we're advising people on this, the longer the time frame that we've got, the better off the outcome usually is, because we have time to work towards those goals.
And I think that's the important thing is the earlier that you start, the better off that you're ultimately going to be. There's nothing worse than when you sit in front of a client and they need a retirement income of, pick a number, 80 grand a year, 90 grand a year. That's what their goal is. And I think that's also an important distinction within this is, what are your actual retirement income goals? What's going to be a comfortable income for you rather than just a median statistic? But the worst conversations that we have are, this is the retirement income goal that you want. This is what we can do if we optimize your situation. But even if we optimize your situation, we don't have the time frame in order to be able to help facilitate getting to that goal without taking on an extreme amount of risk, which is just, for us, something that we don't want to do on behalf of a client. So either one of two options needs to happen, and that's you reduce your expectations around your retirement income, or you increase your working career in order to be able to help facilitate that goal. Which option do we want to go down? That's never a pleasant conversation. But the earlier that you start working towards this, the better off that you're ultimately going to be, and the less likely that you're going to end up in a situation where you need to make either one of those two decisions. So for us, it's determine what the income goal is. And then once you know what the income goal is and the time frame that you've got to get there, then it's okay, how do we position your assets in order to help facilitate that goal? Because maybe your income goal is going to be relatively linear. Maybe you're not planning on doing travel, and maybe property is the right, asset class to get there. Maybe you want to have more flexibility around the income that you're going to have. And so, maybe property is not the right. Depending on people's preferences, depending on people's goals, comfort levels, time frame, all of that will determine what the strategy is to get there. But it makes it very difficult to have a personalized strategy when you don't have a personalized goal.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that saying. One of the other things that we take into consideration as well, I don't think we touched on it before, is in terms of the accommodation costs for somebody when they're retired. So with these assumptions that we're making the assumption that somebody owns their own property and has their house paid off by the time they actually stop working. So that's a really big one. If you consider those numbers that we were talking about before, especially with the rental issue that we're having in Australia at the moment, if you had to find a rental place and make it work with those numbers, it's impossible. You couldn't do it. So the assumption that we make is you need to be mortgage free and have your accommodation costs sorted by the time you hit retirement. That's the ultimate position that we could hope for in that perspective, because if not, it does get quite difficult. So when we're doing retirement planning, At the same time, we're also talking about debt elimination strategies if there is a mortgage involved as well too.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to consider that, look, age pension for a lot of people is going to form part of their retirement strategy. Even if that's going to form part of your retirement strategy, I would very strongly recommend that that's a supplement to your retirement strategy rather than just the retirement strategy. You look at what's been happening over the last, say 12 months or so, and you're looking at, if you don't own your own home or have a mortgage, your expenses have increased dramatically in that regard. You look at inflation over the last 12 months has, we're talking 5 to 7% over the last 12 months of inflation. Your expenses have increased significantly, and in essence, your age pension has increased by nowhere near that same rate. And so making sure that you do have other assets, even if your main retirement vehicle is going to be age pension, in order to be able to, smooth out those periods of time where expenses are going to be higher, is a very important risk mitigation strategy as well.
Yeah, diversification is always critical, and the more lines that we have in the pond, the better off we usually are, right?
So exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Andrew, well said, well summarised.
Hopefully, that's given people some more direction around the level of income they need in retirement. And if it has, subscribe, and look forward to catching you on the next podcast.
And feel free to reach out if you wanted to have a chat about your circumstances. We'd be more than happy to have a talk.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.